Hi, and glad you remembered to come back for part 2 of the video. So here's the last example we're going to do together before you try 4 examples on your own. Once again, this equation is not in the proper form for us to start factoring because we don't have all terms on one side and 0 on the other. Sometimes you will have terms that already have brackets in. You have to be careful. You can't start solving for the brackets until you are in the proper form with everything on one side. So what you first have to do is use the distributive property to remove those brackets. 4 times x squared is 4x squared. 4 times negative x is negative 4x equals negative 1. Alright, now we have to add 1 to both sides so that we get everything over to one side of the equation. So that's 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. Now that everything is on one side and equal 0 on the other, now we are ready to select our factoring strategy. The correct factoring strategy in this example is a tricky trinomial. So that means we are trying to find two numbers that multiply to give us 4 and add to give us negative 4. And what are those two numbers? Those two numbers are negative 2 and negative 2. They happen to be the same numbers. So, using decomposition, 4x squared minus 2x minus 2x plus 1. Common factor the first two, 2x, and you're left with 2x minus 1. Common factor the second two. The only thing you can factor out is a negative 1, and you are left with 2x minus 1. Then we have a common factor of 2x minus 1, and you are left with 2x minus 1. And since both brackets are the same, we've talked about this, that the proper format to write that is 2x minus 1 squared. So here's one of your special cases where there will not be two different solutions. In this case, if you look at it this way, there are two solutions, but because the brackets are the same, both solutions are going to be the same. So that means there is really only one solution. You only have one bracket. So when we set that bracket equal to 0 and then solve it, add 1 to both sides, divide both sides by 2, we just have one solution. If we did that with the second bracket, we'd end up with the exact same solution. So there are, like I said, some circumstances where there aren't two solutions, but there's only one. One thing I will tell you is that with quadratic equations, there's never more than two. There are two solutions, there is one solution, and there are some examples where there are no solutions. But those we will save for next unit. So most people who have difficulty with this concept, it's not because they're not aware of how to solve the quadratic equation, it's more that they're still not comfortable with their factoring strategy. So this is where we're saying if you are not able to factor, we really want you to come in for some extra help, because from this point on, that's the only new part. The factoring you've already done. Once you have factored it, set each factor equal to 0, then solve each of these linear equations for x. You've been doing that since grade 9. So this is the only new material here. The hardest part will be the factoring. Say it one more time. Once it's factored, set each factor equal to 0, then solve each of these linear equations for x. And those are your solutions. So it is now your turn to try 4 examples. Make sure you have everything on one side and 0 on the other side before you start factoring. So you can stop the video, try your 4 examples, and then go back to the video to check your answers. So pause the video now, try examples 5 to 8. Okay, let's see how you did. With question 5, first thing you had to do was subtract 3x from both sides so that everything was on one side equals 0 on the other. That was a simple trinomial factor. Once again, from here up, you should already know how to do. From here down, that's the new material that you're learning today. Take each factor, set it equal to 0, solve each factor for x. Each of these factors will always be linear. So add 2 to both sides, add 1 to both sides. Question 6. Everything is already on the left with 0 on the right, so it was a common factor. So set each factor equal to 0. In this example here, you are just dividing both sides by 3. And here, adding 4. There's your 2 solutions. One little hint or piece of knowledge. Anytime you are going to do a common factor, so if you're doing a common factor, one of your factors is going to be a monomial. And since one of them is a monomial, you're always going to get that step where you're not going to have a constant to add or subtract to both sides. You're only going to be dividing by the coefficient. So you're always going to end up with x equals 0 as one of the solutions. So basically, anytime you have a factor here with no brackets, that means your solution is always going to end up being 0. Number 7, had to subtract 4 from both sides. It was a tricky trinomial, and there's the 2 solutions it would produce. And lastly, question 8, you had to subtract 9 from both sides. Now, some of you might have jumped straight to this being a difference of squares. If you saw that as being a difference of squares right away, you still should have gotten the right answer. However, some of you might have seen that there was first a common factor of 4, then a difference of squares. Once you have factored it and you are setting each factor equal to 0, you do not have to take a constant like that and set it equal to 0, because you are trying to figure out what values of x make 0. So if one of your factors is just a constant, there is no value of x, so you don't have to worry about that factor in part of your solution. Alright, so any of these questions, if you had difficulty with them, please make note of it and ask your teacher when you get to class the next day. Hope you enjoyed solving quadratic equations by factoring, and we'll see you in class next day. Bye-bye.